Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. Are you really fed up with your IBS symptoms controlling your life? Are you frustrated with feeling like you're going in circles day in and day out, and you seem to try things on your own? You're taking in all the information, but you're still finding yourself stuck. If that's you, I invite you to join the Master Method membership. This is a science-backed holistic program for IBS that we've developed with you in mind. It covers what to do to support digestion, how to support the drivers of IBS, including gut-brain connection, your microbiome, altered motility, and even altered immune activation. We also talk about how to support your nutrition and your overall health through your diet, with a focus on what to actually add to your diet versus only what to take away. And we guide you through all 3 steps of the low FODMAP diet process in many different ways if you want to use that evidence-based tool for IBS. This program has been proven to work with many with IBS because it truly does approach health and well-being from a whole body perspective, while also targeting IBS specifically. Our founding membership is now open for enrollment until May 31st. So if you're ready to get guidance so that you can take control of your symptoms, join a community of others who are working on their IBS and ready to connect with those who get it, and lifestyle resources to help you every step of the way, then join the membership today at the link in show notes. Welcome back to the Gut Show. Today, we are going to try to cover a topic that I have been asked about so many times. I have done so much research and digging into all available information on. I have talked to people. I have tried to listen to the experts. I have tried things with my patients and my clients to learn from them. And this topic is so complex and so poorly, this is a better word, studied. And that is birth control and IBS. So I will preface this by saying that I'm not a solid birth control expert. I am going to share the information I have, what I've seen with clients, what we know, where there may be missing links, so that you can take that information into other conversations and take it to wherever you want to take it. I'm an IBS expert, and so we can talk about things from that perspective. But I did want to hit on this topic this season because, again, it is something that I'm asked about all the time. And I wanted to provide the information that I do have if you are kind of starting that dig yourself, or even just opening yourself up to the conversation to see what's going on. I will also preface this by saying that my conversation here does not include any biases I have. I'm not going to tell you whether you should be taking birth control or you shouldn't, or what's better, or what's more moral, or what's more ethical, or what's more right. I'm not putting any opinion into this episode because I don't think that that is what this topic needs more of. I think this topic needs more data. It needs more research. It needs more objective information versus opinions, because we really need just more information on women's health so that women, those who deal with these cycles and deal with these specific hormones, have more autonomy in their decisions. So that is where I'm coming from. That is what you can expect. If that is not what you want, it is okay. You can leave and you can come back next week for a different topic that you may love even more or may appreciate more. So I totally understand if that's you. But if you are interested in this topic, buckle up because we're going to dive in. So whenever we're thinking about birth control, we know that the impact both of birth control and on digestion, as well as irritable bowel syndrome and digestion on hormones, is complex, and it can vary, like the impact itself and the relationship for every single person. No two people are going to be the exact same because our bodies are different, our microbiomes are different, our hormones are different. There's a lot of differences that we all have. And so when we are changing that in some way with birth control, or even how we're thinking about menstrual cycles and the role of these hormones in their relationship with our gut, like it's just going to be very individual and different. There are some studies that suggest that hormonal contraceptives, so hormonal birth control, can cause digestive issues. There is some data on that. And that can include changes in bowel movements, which could be diarrhea or constipation or just altered motility. It can also be bloating. That is a more common side effect that is seen. For many forms of birth control, it's thought that these symptoms are more short-term as the body adjusts, which we see with any kind of medication or anything that we're putting in that's altering or kind of our body's adjusting to. We often will see GI symptoms and gut symptoms that tend to improve as the body adjusts to what you're taking. So that is kind of the main conversation that you're going to see around gut symptoms related to birth control. But with that, there are also studies that show there's no significant impact on digestive symptoms, and there's not really studies done on the impact of the gut itself and the gut microbiome. So there's a lot of missing holes here. And as we're going to talk about, each type of birth control is very different. And so there's not a lot of data on specific types to help us better understand which ones may be more effective for, diarrhea versus constipation. And so again, there's a lot of gaps that really do need to be filled with more information. Generally, hormonal contraceptives, so birth control pills, especially those that are hormonal, they can alter levels of hormones in the body. And this change in hormones can affect gut motility. So it can lead to changes in bowel movements. So again, diarrhea or constipation, and can impact digestive symptoms. However, the specific effects of birth control on digestion and IBS is going to vary based on the type of hormonal contraceptive or birth control used. It can also be related to the person's health and their own hormone levels to start with, and other factors that may be completely unrelated or may overlap in some way. So things like if, birth control impacts how you eat, that could possibly then impact your gut. Or if birth control impacts your sleep, that could then impact your gut. So there could be these kind of overlapping connections that aren't necessarily direct, but linked in some way. A flip side to this with IBS, and this is something that is fascinating because this is what I get asked about the most. I hear about people who start birth control and they have IBS and their symptoms get worse. But we also see for many individuals with IBS, their symptoms actually go away or at least worsen with birth control in place. Now, why is this happening? That opens up a whole conversation about the role of hormonal changes in IBS. We've covered that in our menstrual cycle episode way back, and we're going to go over that again in a moment, just so that you know what the menstrual cycle is. And I'll also include a blog that we have if you need to see this more on paper, see a visual of this. But the shifts of hormones throughout your menstrual cycle do contribute to symptoms for many people. And so if birth control is helping reduce some of those shifts, then you may actually have fewer symptoms on birth control. The conversation that is pretty controversial and is also one that, again, isn't studied enough. Like we don't have enough good information on it. We don't have a lot of data to use in practice or even best practices truly, because not a lot of people are really actively practicing options here, is the role of hormones in the development of IBS and even how we're supporting women's hormones and even what can cause these shifts and these drastic shifts to lead to more severe symptoms. So things like PCOS and endometriosis, or even just hormonal health overall, is that the problem that we need to be addressing over just utilizing birth control? And that's the big question mark of why symptoms could be improving. And then the question that is not answered is, well, is it a bad thing that birth control can help improve symptoms? And is it something we should be using more of or less of and taking a different approach? Science doesn't really tell us that yet, but hopefully that will continue to improve. So a little bit of a review of your menstrual cycle, just to be familiar with that before we get into all of the different types of birth control. Your menstrual cycle starts with your follicular phase. So if you're not sure of like the day that your menstrual cycle starts, if you are a menstruating individual, it starts on the day of your first full bleed of menstruation. And that's the start of your follicular phase. That includes menstruation. And then it also includes all the way up until ovulation. So all of menstruation, which is can vary per person, but around 5-ish days. And then that period of time between menstruation and ovulation is the follicular phase. Ovulation happens. It's kind of on its own. The egg is released during ovulation, and then you move into your luteal phase, which then takes you to your next phase of menstruation. So you have your follicular phase, ovulation, and then you have your luteal phase, which takes you into menstruation. Your typical like PMS stage, which is usually the few days to a week before your menstruation, even some people experience spotting during that time, that is actually part of the luteal phase more than it is the follicular phase, if that makes sense. When we're looking at the menstrual cycle, kind of the controllers of this, there are two major hormones. There's more, but two major ones that are involved in menstruation, and that is estrogen and progesterone. So these hormones, they work on sex organs. But what's interesting is that we also have receptors in your GI tract, in your gut, for these hormones. So whenever there are fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone, this can influence your gut function, and it can also influence IBS symptoms, which might just be a more severe manifestation of these gut symptoms because of the role of visceral hypersensitivity and all the other factors that are going into IBS. Before ovulation, what happens is that estrogen, so estrogen is hanging out, estrogen levels are rising leading up to ovulation throughout the follicular phase, and they reach their peak at ovulation. Then they rapidly drop at the end of ovulation. And ovulation is a moment where the egg is released. So your ovulation period, sometimes we'll say it's about 3 days. Because it's hard to really pinpoint the exact moment, but that's where estrogen is rising, and then it rapidly drops and declines. That shift in estrogen can increase the symptoms of bloating and constipation specifically. And for some people, it can feel like pain and cramping. That's really common during that stage. During your luteal phase, so after that happens, moving into the luteal phase, as you get closer to menstruation, progesterone levels have been rising. So estrogen rises during the follicular and then drops right after ovulation. Now progesterone is rising through your luteal phase, and it reaches its peak and then drops right before the start of menstruation. That increase, that kind of reaching the peak, leads to more pain, more bloating, diarrhea. Typically, for constipation, we also can see a rise in constipation and nausea. And that kind of goes alongside those PMS symptoms that many people experience. So if you also have PCOS or endometriosis and you experience really bad PMS symptoms, these can kind of collide and make those symptoms even more extreme, and also more of a GI manifestation of the symptoms. So keeping that in mind, and if you need to go to show notes and grab that link so you can kind of see that visual of your phases, so you can picture it as we're talking through the rest, go do it. I'll be waiting. But we're going to talk about the different types of birth control and what they do. So the first one is the most common, I guess, in a way, is hormonal contraceptives. So these are deemed hormonal because they work at altering the levels of hormones in the body to prevent ovulation and then prevent pregnancy. So they reduce that shift in hormones to just prevent ovulation to begin with. That's the main goal. This can include the birth control pill, the hormonal patch, the hormonal ring, or even injections for some people. The hormonal pill, like the birth control pill, is the one that I see the most often in my clients and my patient population, but there's a lot of options that are out there. And if you're not sure, you can ask, like, is this hormonal contraceptive? And that will help give you your answer. Looking at the United States, there are some different forms of hormonal contraceptives. So again, the birth control pill, and even within the birth control pills, there are types of pills. So there are combination pills that are available that might contain both estrogen and progestin. There's also progestin only pills that you can use that don't include estrogen, and both of those can be taken to prevent ovulation. But if you're taking estrogen and progestin, sometimes if you're having negative reactions, they may switch you to the progestin only and then take away that estrogen that they're throwing in. And sometimes that will help even out symptoms. For some people, having more estrogen may actually help with their symptoms. And so it really depends on the person, but keep that in mind as you're thinking about which type that you're using. And then you can ask your doctor, okay, what is this doing to my hormonal levels? And then keep in mind that picture of your cycle to see what could be shifting or not shifting as a result. The patch is another form of hormonal birth control. It's placed on the skin and it typically contains a variety of hormones that will prevent pregnancy, and you replace it every week. I've rarely seen clients with this, so I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with those who are using the patch, but it is available. There's also a ring. I think it's called the Uva ring is like the brand of that, but there's a ring. It's placed into the vagina and it releases hormones from the ring to prevent pregnancy and is replaced every 3 weeks. Again, I don't see that one very often either. Anything that's physically placed can create its own risks. So I believe that's not used as often. And then there's also an implant that's a rod that is placed in the skin, typically in the arm, that then releases hormones. So instead of taking the pill, it's released in the arm, and that can last up to 3 years. I've seen a couple of people with that, but again, I don't see that as frequently as the pill. With any of these options, the increased estrogen is typically the one that's going to lead to similar symptoms around ovulation, which is usually going to be the bloating and the constipation. So those who deal with significant constipation, if constipation is worsening, one thing you could look for is estrogen levels in birth control to see if that could be contributing. Now, what you do with that information is your choice and your decision and something to think about with your entire team, but it's just something to keep in mind. Whereas those with diarrhea, you may notice that it improves with birth control, and that could give you an insight into why maybe estrogen is a player in that, and you're experiencing kind of the symptoms of excess estrogen from the birth control, and then that is maybe combating some of the hypermotility or the diarrhea that you were experiencing before. Another type of birth control that is often used are intrauterine devices, or IUDs. So these are little T-shaped devices that are inserted into the uterus to prevent pregnancy. They can either be used to release hormones, so some will, or they'll create kind of an environment that is hostile to sperm. So they either can release hormones or they create an environment itself where the sperm die. So they kill the sperm before the sperm can do what they're doing with the egg, right? And so there's 2 different options with these, and that's helpful to know. Some of the hormonal IUDs are going to be the brands Mirena, Skyla, and Loletta. And these release low dose hormone progestin into the uterus. So these are typically not going to be estrogen releasers, but progestin. The hormone then will thicken the cervical mucus, and that will make it difficult for the sperm to reach the egg. And then that can also prevent ovulation because of the thickening of the mucus. So it's not reducing ovulation because of the estrogen levels, but it's thickening the mucus to then possibly impact ovulation, but also impact the sperm's ability to fertilize the egg. Hormonal IUDs are pretty effective at preventing pregnancy, so they are used a lot, and they can last for 3 to 5 years, depending on which type you're using, which can be really effective. The negative is getting them put in. I've never had that done personally, but I have heard the stories, and I know that's an area that also needs more attention from our healthcare providers. Another type of IUD is a copper IUD. And this is the brand Paragard is very common. This does not contain hormones at all, but instead copper is released into the uterus, and that is toxic to sperm, and that can prevent the fertilization. So it's kind of killing the sperm and creating that toxic environment, right? These can last up to 10 years, which is a long time, and they can be pretty effective. There is some concern about the copper in the body. Is this not a good idea for some people? That would be a conversation, again, to have with your healthcare team and keep in mind, because there are some cases where copper toxicity is a real thing for some people. Not something to be overly fearful about, but a conversation to have, because if that is going on in your body, that could create stress, and it could create symptoms from a different kind of a different place, right? It could be more of that link that's not really direct, but these indirect effects. So something just to keep in mind and make sure that you're talking to your team about. When it comes to information that we have on digestion and IUDs, some people, like it is shown that some people will experience symptoms like bloating, cramping, or changes in bowel movements after getting an IUD, but typically these symptoms do go away. And that might be more of the body, again, adjusting to what's going on, or even just the physical placement of it. Again, it can be a lot of stress on the body. You've heard, if you have heard the stories or you've experienced that yourself, I know it can be pretty painful. And whenever you have anything going on that's painful to the body, and the body's reacting to that, or the body's reacting to even a foreign object in itself, right? That can create some stress in the body, and especially stress in that area. It might create some pelvic pain that leads to even pelvic floor function for a small period of time. So there could be some things going on that can create some of those short-term effects, but typically this will settle. There are some cases where IUDs have been shown to cause more severe digestive symptoms like pain, nausea, and diarrhea specifically. These symptoms are rare, but could be a sign that your body is not reacting well to the device. And so if you have that drastic either increase or shift in symptoms with the IUD, then that would be something to communicate to your doctor quickly, right? And keep communicating as you're getting further away from the placement of it to make sure that it is working for you and not contributing to more symptoms than it should be. Another option for birth control is not really a normal form of birth control, but sterilization. So this is more of a permanent method of birth control that can prevent pregnancy, and it can block the fallopian tubes by either cutting them, tying them, or sealing them. So that would be like a tubal ligation that happens often for female anatomy, and then a vasectomy for male anatomy is often used. A hysterectomy can also be kind of a form of this like sterilization, and that's where the uterus is completely removed, and in some cases the ovaries are also removed. This can have significant effects on hormones, usually like a tubal ligation and even a vasectomy. Those may not have as intense effects on hormones, but a hysterectomy definitely can. And so if the uterus is removed, so not like kind of a partial hysterectomy where the ovaries are left and the ovaries continue to produce hormones, then what typically will happen is that there's not really a big shift in the hormone levels or menopause symptoms or those shifts that are typically happening. But if the uterus and the ovaries are removed, then that will actually drop a lot of hormones because hormones are not being produced. And so that can result in early menopause if someone's not already in menopause, or just push them into menopause. It can also lead to menopausal symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, and even vaginal dryness. There have been some studies, and it's very small and again needs to be looked at more, but there was a study that I saw a long time ago about how in menopause we see a lot of IBS cases kind of go down, which is sort of that piece of, well, what are hormones doing and how are they playing a role in what's going on? And so for some people, this, a total hysterectomy could be a positive shift for their gut symptoms. But for some, because again, the hormone levels are being impacted and they're adjusting and they're changing, that could then cause more IBS symptoms. And it's also important to say, not always is it a hormonal thing, but any type of surgical procedure, if there are adhesions or scar tissue that's building up due to the surgery, or there's complications with the surgery that cause maybe excess stress in the body, that may also contribute to more gut symptoms. And then the other forms of birth control, like barrier methods, which would be like condom use or natural family planning, where you watch your cycle and utilize other forms, especially like barrier methods on days of ovulation, where you're more likely to be fertile. Those are obviously not going to impact IBS and IBS symptoms, because those will not necessarily be changing or adding anything new into the body. They're just kind of other forms of preventing pregnancy. And so those are options too that you can discuss with your healthcare team if you are considering the change of birth control, but you're worried about what the impact could be. There are options available that you can talk about, and it's helpful, again, without any bias, without any opinion put into the conversation. It's just helpful to know what all of your options are, so you can have that open, honest conversation. You can take into account your needs and your entire health and like what all is going on in your body, to decide what's best for you, and really know what your options are and how to best utilize those options. And so taking that into your appointment can be extremely helpful and hopefully feel empowering. So I want to end this episode with an affirmation or encouragement, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, that if you notice that hormones somehow play a role in your symptoms. So maybe you notice this menstrual cycle connection, or maybe you notice where, oh, whenever I was pregnant, my symptoms went away, or whenever I had a baby and then my hormones, evened back out, like my symptoms got worse or they got better, or you've noticed these changes. Maybe you're in perimenopause, maybe you are in menopause or postmenopause and your symptoms changed. You're not crazy. It's not all in your head. You're not making it up. And if anyone makes you feel that way, then they may not be taking it as seriously as they should be, because there's definitely a connection. We know that for sure. We don't have good data on how to truly treat it, if you will, or fully address it beyond what we know that we can do to support hormonal function, the investigation of things like PCOS and endometriosis, and even supporting the gut and the health of your gut and your microbiome and its relationship with your hormones. Like, there are things that we can definitely do, but there's not a lot of like really solid evidence behind all of these connections. And just because there's not a lot of evidence, know that you are not making it up and your experience is still very real. Also know that there is not a lot of evidence. And so there's a lot of misinformation online. There's a lot of companies that are making a lot of money from tests and supplements that may not be regulated or validated, that are preying on this problem and this lack of data. And you do get to choose. It is always your choice in what you do with your body and with your decisions about your health and your health care. But just know that those things are out there, and having open conversations, asking questions, and just digging into what is available, as well as watching where data goes in the future, can be so helpful. And that's something that we have to do with our patients every single day, which makes it tricky, but there is hope for the future of medicine and of science, and where things are going, because people are speaking up about it, because people are noticing it, and we're not taking, oh, it's not connected, or no, that's in your head. We're not taking that as an answer any longer. So as a reminder, if you need more of a written form of this, I will link a blog or two in the show notes for you to go check out. That way you have kind of a written form. Those are a lot of words, a lot of things, so you can go back to and enjoy. And then if you've stayed with me through this harder topic, next week is a more fun topic, in my opinion, and a little bit of a more creative one than we've had in a couple of weeks, and that is self-care. We're going to talk all about what self-care is and what the role of self-care looks like in IBS, as well as how to think about it and approach it in a way that is effective, and not just this word that we think we know, but we don't actually know how to implement it or how to monitor it. We're going to talk all about that next week, which self-care, we know, can help with hormonal health too. So they go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Would love to hear what you took away from it. And I can't wait to see you in next week's episode. Do you want to keep learning from me in bite-sized pieces, as well as even be able to ask me questions and get those answered? If that is true, then you should follow me on social media so that you can learn from myself, but also my incredible team. You can find us on Instagram at erinjudge.rd or at Gutivate. You can also find us at TikTok, same name. And then you can also find us, if you're not already on YouTube for longer and shorter videos than the one that you listened to today. And if you're someone who really does enjoy compiled information from different brands we trust and different recipes that we enjoy, then you can also follow us on Pinterest, where you can see our own boards, but also the boards that we have been able to compile other great IBS friendly links and resources for you.